Thanks to the KUN band. Rolling Stones' 26th drummer of all time, the drummer from rock band Tool.
Please tell me you can see the masks that are being worn by all those kids in that photograph, including the guy that was playing the clarinet right behind him. They were all wearing masks. That whole stadium of people is trying to decide whether they should be wearing masks or not. It was the most absurd display I've ever seen, and that was really December 11th, 2021, a full 2 years into the theater. College kids were still completely lost. We had still not stood up for them. We had still not saved any of them. They are effectively still gone because of this bullshit. So don't think for 1 second that this is over. We have to save them still from this.
Shouldn't just be a few people that are leaders. Everybody has to figure out their own leader inside themselves. If they're too shy to go approach somebody in person, then stick a card or a flyer on someone's car next to you every time you park your car. Stick a card inside of a gas station credit card slot every time you get gas. If everybody that is aware of the truth and awake to the truth started to do these things, we can touch people, the hearts and minds of people, one person at a time in day-to-day living. We don't need these echo chambers online where we're all repeating to the same followers most of the time. We get a few new people, but I think we really need more people to take what they're learning and get out there and touch the people that they're in a community with.
By about 1660, John Locke wrote that day laborers and tradesmen, spinsters and dairymaids must be told what to believe. The greatest part cannot know, and therefore they must believe.
On every slide, the first slide I have quotes, and I know that you don't read them at all because you don't need to read them to pass or get a good grade. But this one is pretty cool. The quote from Alice in Wonderland. "One can't believe impossible things," said Alice. "I dare say you haven't had much practice," said the Queen. "Why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." So that's totally suitable for this lecture. A lot of impossible things are going to happen today.
it's gotten harder to evaluate what's going on, then it's presumably gotten easier for people to lie and to exaggerate, and then one should be a little bit suspicious, and that's sort of my starting bias.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. How not to say murder, according to these people, is not to mention supplemental oxygen induces acute respiratory distress syndrome. You also should be very careful not to mention the lack of antibiotic use and how it basically qualifies for murder if you were blaming it on a virus or using that as an excuse, not to mention the multi-year opioid crisis, or not to explain PCR as a fraud, or not to mention injection versus ingestion and how different they are, or not to mention the population pyramids, or not to mention Brandy Vaughn. They're all really good strategies for sticking to the script of a novel virus and not mentioning murder. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. I'm starting to think I got a job to do that was not finished. And I don't know how many of these people are going to be very happy about it, but that's kind of how I feel right now. It's very good to be here, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is JJCouey, the guy that is going to try and bring a new Biology 101 to as many high schoolers as I can in 2025 and beyond. I do believe that an organized conscious and intelligent manipulation of our habits and opinions has been executed flawlessly due to our acquiescence to social media. We are being ruled by a theater that is provided to us by social media, and any engagement with social media essentially makes us enslaved by it. The reason why I'm going at this so hard is because I don't think we're going to have another chance to save our grandkids. I think the window for saving our grandkids is actually whether or not they adopt social media as it stands right now and its future generations from this, or whether we establish a new means of communicating that is based on a decentralized network of trusted people in our lives, just like we would have done it if we had been using mailboxes all along. The voice that you are hearing is the voice of JJCouey. I am a biologist in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I started Gigaohm Biological as an LLC in response to losing my job in 2021 at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, where I was, I guess you could say, maybe, I don't know, censored or something like that. Who knows? Nobody worries about me. And I don't think you should either, because I've got some really great followers and I've got some really great plans moving forward. But if you want to evaluate who you're hearing for the first time and you want to do some legwork on me, you can find the long list of and proof of my track record chasing tenure that culminated in some work at the University of Pittsburgh, but is also intertwined with a Nobel Prize that was awarded in 2014. So I'm not nobody. You can find that work on PubMed. You can also find a few, you can't really see 3 presentations that I gave to Panda, because their chair, Nick Hudson, and their co-chair, Jonathan Engler, lost those 3 presentations, but I have them in my archive. It doesn't matter. My more recent presentations are much better anyway. I also presented to the NCI, although I think you'll have a hard time finding that one just because they have recorded so many presentations and have not organized them at all. It's, again, just one of those fire hose strategies. I presented to the wellness company. I think I probably could have gotten a sponsorship from them had I said the right things in phone calls or just said yes at some point, but I didn't. I didn't ever get to the point where I was so financially desperate, thanks in part to a 1.5 years working for Children's Health Defense and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and having supporters in between there. My family has been okay, and we are still okay in Pittsburgh. I was able to present at the Red Pill Expo in June of 2024. That's still a pretty good presentation, especially because it really comes the raw experience of having to cope with telling your wife and your family that this guy's a hero, and then months later say, oops, I was wrong about that, and then saying, oh, I'm excited about this person, and then months later having to say you're wrong about that. It's been a really rough learning curve for me to try and figure out how it is that even if I'm presenting at the Red Pill Expo, it's possible that I'm completely surrounded by people who are there specifically to, again, muddy the waters, obfuscate the truth, make sure there's enough noise so that the signal can't be heard. And so I've spent the last 5 years fighting against that, at first thinking that I was just going to eventually be able to convince people that there are better ways to say things and that they were just saying them incorrectly or whatever. And now I've come to understand that we have been misled, because RNA cannot pandemic, intramuscular injection is dumb, transfection was always a crime, and the population pyramids are real. And I hope I'm going to be able to make the case for all of these things today, especially the last one, because I think it's a vital bridge that can bridge the gap between us and our family and friends, who doesn't matter what side of the team they play on, red or blue or up or down. If everybody starts to understand that this myth enslaves all of us, we might actually make some progress and stop chasing, followers that we don't need to chase, and instead start spreading the message in the right way. So in order to help that go forward, please go to gigaohmbiological.com. Please send an email to Gigaohm headquarters at proton.me to get notified of upcoming streams. We'll probably start that next week. You can also see the archive at stream.gigaohm.bio that is paid for by myself. And a significant contribution is actually also made by a viewer named Ted, and also as far as administration goes, and also a financial contribution made by my friend Mark Kulak, who also has his own archive there that you can find and also download videos and watch them offline, that kind of thing. And we have a little ongoing conversation at gigaohm.bio. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's a little quiet there. But there's also a way to private message me there. So if you want to try and get a hold of me, that's another way to do it. Thanks very much for being here. I'll be here in a few seconds.
I don't care how you get there. I don't care what you do to get there. The goal is to win.
What time is it? Game time! Woo!
Got to get those sliders in the right place if you're going to get this to work right. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. Long Strange Trip. If you're here for the first time, I'm really happy to have you. This is an important broadcast today. I think I'm going to nail some things down about this Lollapalooza of liars that I have been an unwitting participant in for some time. I'm very, very, very excited. I don't know why that's so loud, but we're going to keep going here. We're trying to dispel the enchantment of an illusion of consensus. A group of witting and unwitting participants have led us to believe things about our biology that aren't true. They may even be trying to invert the sovereignty of most humans on the planet with a story, a mythology. And so we've got to start with the truth. That's what that Latin phrase underneath there says. Start with the truth. That's what we've got to do. And we can definitely not assume that we've had it. We've been shown a lot of things that are kind of true from some angle or another, but we don't know the truth. A lot of us don't know yet. I'm willing to believe that I don't know a lot of the truth yet, because my consciousness is still their prime real estate, because I don't have a way of getting information other than a lot of their ways, their funnels. And so it still might be that we are largely engaged in a debate about what is perceived to be true. We've got to be very, very careful of this. That's what I believe the pandemic was. I believe we were just bamboozled into believing something in a very similar way that for the last two generations we've been bamboozled into believing that our money is money. We've been bamboozled into believing that these people have our best interests in mind and that they're not waging a multi-generational war against us. We've been led to believe that our history is something that it's not. We've been led to believe that certain novels are revealing certain things, and I think there are a few people on the internet like Mark Kulak that are really working hard to dispel this mythology. I think Mark Kulak has been hitting some real home runs lately, and more importantly, he's getting into the stride of having played this jazz song so long now that he can hit the stream button and just tell it to you another way. And today I'm going to try to do that as well. Shout out to Joe Marshall. Shout out to Grace's dad. Shout out to, I don't have that. Where is that? Oh, that's right there. Shout out to Uwe Alschner. And shout out to Ned. Really, really happy to have all you guys on side. We're trying to show as many people as we can. We're trying to show new people now. This is the trick. I think we've been making a mistake trying to, steal followers from Robert Malone or try to convince people on our side, on the conservative side or the Christian side or whatever side you think you're on, that there is some illusion of consensus, because those people are still trapped in this one. They're still trapped by these people, the leaders of these organizations, the tweets of these organizations. And so to wake them up is to break people out of the same spell that the Democrats were under, but different spellcasters. And so maybe what we need to do right now is pivot and try to wake up some people whose illusions of the system may have been broken recently by the election of Donald Trump. And so we should be looking at these people on the left and saying, can we warn you about something? Can we let you know that before the pandemic, you guys had a little different position about pharma and about screens, and now for some reason your side and our side agree on some pretty wickedly nasty things. And just like you have been consciously and intelligently manipulated, so have we. And more importantly, we on the right have been manipulated by a very visible group of people that all of us can identify with. And so if we could show that to our family and friends, we might even be able to make an excuse for why we fell for a spectacular commitment to the lies just like they did. It's just a different list. And once you see that list is composed of very similar talking points, very similar players, very similar targeted audience content makers, there are people on the other side that are just as bad as Soph. There are people on the other side that are just as bad as Sasha Latipova and Robert Malone. It's just that we don't see those people because we don't engage in that rhetoric and answering those questions. We have been trapped by a different set of meddlers. And if we could plea and explain this to people and plea with them to understand that if we can look at ourselves and see that we have been fooled by people that work for the Human Genome Project and by the anonymous accounts that they coordinate with, if we can see that we have been fooled by people from the Human Genome Project and the podcasts that they go on and the fake meddlers that they amplify, then we can also convince perhaps the left that they also have people like this that have played the same game about the virus and about what you should do and about what you should accept. We just have players that they haven't seen. We just have stories they haven't heard. And we have been controlled by these people for a decade. Look at Mary there. They all need us to teach gain of function to our kids still. They all need it because that's really what this has always been about. It has always been about that. It's not about, I don't want to put that on. I could, but I don't want to put that on. That's, what am I looking for here? Sorry about that for a second. I lost a file. It will come here where I can't barely see that. It's so far away. Sorry. And there it is. Thank you very much. Wow, that's annoying.
Viral phylloxera, it's a lab leak.
Yes. So they do need us to teach this mythology to our children, and I think that this farm is now waking up. The farm animals are waking up. We're starting to get common sense again. And I like the mass brainwashing effect gets watered down after a while. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that they got less compliance than they needed. There is a significant number of people that didn't comply and are not only okay, but are better off. And that truth is starting to become visible. It's starting to become visible in people's demeanor. It's starting to become visible in their rhetoric, in the way that they talk. And they seem sort of trapped in this thing where their own ridiculousness is starting to appear ridiculous to themselves, because even young adults are capable of remembering the history of the last 5 years and when they got really excited about the guy from Tool drumming at their basketball game and how ridiculous it was and how ridiculous they looked with that mask on. And if we can succinctly show them how it was done and who did it and how long the plan had been orchestrated and why it has a lot more to do with the shortcomings of the Human Genome Project, the data that they still needed to collect, the infrastructure of data storage they needed to build. All of these hypothetical requirements were known by a lot of these people for decades. That's the whole point of the Human Genome Project, was to establish an infrastructure. That's the whole point of the Wittenberg Institute and its connection, high-speed internet connection to wherever else it was connected to that Mark said, was because we were building an infrastructure to collect the medical data, to collect the genetic data, and to start to experiment with how is it that we could dump this data in a uniform format through a computer system that could, use machine learning to try and figure out this biology. That's why Robert Malone and Meryl Nass and Jessica Rose and and Claire Craig and Gerrit van den Bosch and Stephanie Seneff and Kevin McKernan are involved in this right now. And so the sales pitch that I'm making today is that if you just do enough work on the calendars, you can find out how these people have interwoven their stories for 5 years, and it's so malevolent, it's gross. And that's where I also find hope, because it's getting easier and easier for me to show you what they've done, because as we've moved forward, it's going to be harder and harder for people's previous paths to be ignored. Whatever you were doing in 2020 and 2021 is going to live forever if I have anything to say about it, because that's the truth of history, of biology, and I'm doing it because I love my grandchildren and yours. We need to learn the biology that these people have been lying about. We need to learn the truth of intramuscular injection being dumb. We need to learn that transfection in healthy people is a crime. We need to learn that RNA cannot pandemic, because there is no biology to support such an idea, other than the nonsense that these people have misconstrued as virology. Here's the truth, ladies and gentlemen, and I've been trying desperately to get somebody to challenge it for about 2 years now, having been able to say it so succinctly, and no one has. And I believe that's because the U.S. vaccine schedule is a criminal enterprise. You can compare it with any other vaccine schedule in the Western world, and you can see it immediately. This vaccine schedule maybe wasn't always criminal, but certainly is now, and that's the truth that all of these people are trying to protect. Cut. Bingo. Hello. Hi. I'm gonna spin this down quick. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. I am a one-man band here, so just apologize. Let me get all the sound backs set up, ready to go. I really have been working on my Steely Dan chords lately, and I'm very, very pleased to say that I can almost play along with Peg live now. The dude plays some chords, and then also when you realize, if you've ever seen any videos of that dude from Steely Dan playing, he can play with his hands like really high like this, so he gets a really staccato note, and there's quite a bit of accuracy involved in that. If you want to try that, I'm not doing that yet. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. It's the 6th of March, 2025. I'm really happy to be here. I've got a pretty straightforward show for you today. I just, I'll hit a few things, I'll make a few points, and I'll summarize again like I always have. I want to emphasize that this is a message of hope. It is for anyone, maybe not for everyone, but it is definitely for anyone. And today's message is really not for the conservative right. It's not for the Christian right. It's not for our team. It's not for people who have been following Children's Health Defense for a long time, or skeptical of the vaccine for a long time, or Jimmy Dore fans. I really want this to be for that whole other side of America. The side of America that watches PBS NewsHour, that, I don't know, would wear pink to Congress, that, I don't know, thinks that when they're sick, they maybe should wear a mask if they go out in public. Somebody like that. Because I think America is under attack. And I think that the right in America has been bamboozled, exactly like you in general think, in the sense of, Donald Trump fooled all these people. But it's much more complicated than that. It's a much more complicated web of lies that, if you, on the other side, just simplify it down to Donald Trump fooled the people on the right, but he's actually just a rich guy with rich friends, it will be too simple for you to have sympathy for us, sympathy for your fellow Americans. And I want to inspire you to have sympathy for your fellow Americans, not in a pitiful sort of way, but in like a victim sort of way, that they were lied to consistently on social media in a way that you might not be aware of because you were engaged in a more mainstream debate about a lab leak or a natural virus and Tony Fauci and Rand Paul. There was another layer to this show that was even beyond Tucker Carlson and went into his guests on their podcasts that really fooled the Christian right in America. They toured churches in early pandemic times to recruit the Christian right in America to the side of a lab leak cover-up and gain-of-function biology viruses, with the specific design of hijacking them as a political movement, and they were very successful. And in a loose sort of way, you could see MAHA, this Make America Healthy Again movement, as a what do they call that? It's not grassroots, but the opposite. It's a front group. It's a fake movement where anybody on our side that could really speak well and had a really good message that might have made sense to your side was absolutely positively stood in front of. And instead, they curated a debate that ended up hijacking this health freedom movement and all these exercise people and carnivore diet people and whatever. They're all on the conservative side, and they're all in on this MAHA movement, even though most of them are wholly unaware that this movement has been captured by the exact same network of forces that is responsible for the pandemic theater that murdered Americans. And that's what you might not understand yet, is that really the pandemic was a manufactured crisis. It was a manufactured crisis specifically designed to probably extract the remaining value of the dollar and controlled demolish America's economic system. And so that message was something that I was sending on my YouTube channel 5 years ago, called JC on a Bike. And it's still kind of the message that I have for you now, but it is a message of hope, because we still have time to wake our children up to this catastrophe and also to this mythology, so that they will not, or at least can engage in some kind of united noncompliance with regard to the next steps that are going to inevitably be coerced upon us. And so I will switch down here. Oh, sorry. Oh, that didn't work. I gotta probably put this on. I guess I forgot to do that. So I am, like I said, I don't have a producer or anything like that. And I do have some production tricks, and so those things need to be loaded up. Sometimes I forget. I apologize. So I usually characterize this as For All the Marbles, because it's about the grandchildren of Earth, because for new viewers and for people that have never heard this message before, it's really important to see that social media puts your sort of thinking and awareness, the more you use it, it puts it on a smaller and shorter time scales and time horizons. And most of the people that are in the ruling class are thinking very much about multi-generational schemes and plans and allegiances that restrict what they can do and dictate what they are doing in the future. And that network is the network that we need to start thinking about, not exposing or whatever, but you need to think about how you are governed and understand that it is not by voting and by Congress and by this stuff, even though those laws are enforced and cops are real. It's important to understand that the rules are only followed by us, the citizens. The naive citizens follow the rules. Everybody else plays a different game, especially if you are at the stage where you are in the overclass, where fiat currencies don't really matter to you. They're just a tool for wealth extraction, and you just, operate outside of that system. And again, remember, there are dynasties and families and corporations that operate outside of this system of the dollar and taxes and laws. There just are. And if you start there and understand that we are governed by those forces, then it's easier to accept the idea that social media and all the programs that we use in that under that umbrella term are actually just military control programs. These are things that very, very large weaponized piles of money use to, in an organized way, manipulate the habits and opinions of us. And again, it's for all the marbles. And so we need to save our grandchildren from this. That's how severe this is. It's not about pulling us out. It doesn't matter for you, really. It matters about your grandchildren. And so I coined this term when I was still friends with Jessica Hockett before she somehow just, I guess, disappeared and betrayed me. She really liked it. It's a Lollapalooza of liars. Lollapalooza is a music festival that was in Wisconsin and Illinois a lot when I was a young guy. And Lollapalooza is it's a multi-band thing, and there's usually multiple stages. The reason why I like to use that as an analogy, especially if you've never heard this description before, is because the unique nature of Lollapalooza would mean that the people that were performing at Lollapalooza would have an artist's pass, very similar to, let's say, very similar to a pass that you might get if you were, can I do this really quick? Does that work? Yeah. If you were working for Children's Health Defense and you went to one of their conferences as a staff scientist, then you would have a lanyard like this, and this would get you in a lot of places. You could go a lot of places that you didn't necessarily belong, but you could still walk there, because anybody that was working security would see this and check that you're a CHD staff scientist. And so that makes sense. Go ahead, because not everybody's wearing this. And so and that one's not set up either, darn it. At a Lollapalooza of liars, you can imagine people that have a card like this. And so they're able to move around in ways that people that are just entertaining and just bought tickets to the show cannot move around. And that specifically means at Lollapalooza would be backstage. And so if your band was playing on the side stage C, you could probably use your lanyard to go behind backstage at the main stage and maybe run into one of the artists that was playing on the main stage. And that wouldn't be crazy at Lollapalooza, because the backstage areas are kind of intermingled as a VIP area. And so if you think about these people as performing in a Lollapalooza of liars, and podcasts as being the stage, and Tucker Carlson's podcast being a stage, and Tommy's podcast being a stage, and the International COVID Summit being a stage, and Children's Health Defense being a stage, then you see that these people can move backstage between different stages and do the performance that they did a couple weeks ago, or a different version of it, or a new album. And this goes on, and in backstage, they can talk to each other. They meet with each other, and they agree not to talk about people like Brandy Vaughn. They agree to send really nice notes to Brandy, or give her a hug and take pictures with her and tell her that she's a hero too. And then they never actually promote her anywhere that matters, and they take away all of the people that would rather donate to her because she would do what they want done, and instead they end up donating to them, like StopMandatoryVaccinations.com and Larry Cook. And this Lollapalooza of liars, unbeknownst to me, had been going on since before the pandemic, since Brandy Vaughn, who her history as an outspoken critic of vaccines is around 2014 or 15 is when it starts. And so it's become very frustrating to me, because it's a very long, strange trip. I have met almost all of these meddlers on the right, all of these people that trapped Trump voters, trapped maybe Trump skeptics, maybe people who were vaccine skeptical or COVID skeptics but didn't believe in Trump, could still get sucked into Trump's side because of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Mary Holland and Meryl Nass and Robert Malone and Ryan Cole and all of these people, essentially, who only appeal to and only appear in our feeds. They never appeal in your feed. And in fact, probably some of the people that I've already named there are people you've never heard of. And so that's why I think my story is really unique from the perspective of somebody who's kind of an independent or, neoconservative in the sense of just really realizing that, wow, I'm actually a conservative in America now. When I left America to go study in Amsterdam in 2002, I would have considered myself very much on the left and very much obviously on the left. I'm not a corporate guy, and the Republican was a corporate party as far as I remember, but I wasn't political. I was a biologist looking to get tenure. So me, in the last 5 years, I've come into contact with so many people, and these pictures are not, there are very few pictures in this set that are not taken with me believing that I'm taking pictures with somebody that I hope or believe is a good person. All of the pictures that I have here with, can you see my arrow? With Jay Bhattacharya that are made at Broken Science meetings. These pictures are made because I really believed that Jay Bhattacharya is a good guy and that I had a chance to influence him, and that he really did learn a lot of biology from me during the pandemic, and he really think I was a smart guy and a great teacher. These pictures, when I'm first meeting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at the inaugural CHD conference, I was more excited than I've ever been. This picture was actually taken by Mark Kulak down here in the corner. You can still see my arrow, right? Here's me and Mark Kulak and John Bodwin and Merrill Nass and Abby Rockefeller at Boston, in Boston, at the announcement that Bobby was going to run for president. This is me and Del Bigtree when at the same event where Bobby is announcing he's going to run for president. This is Jill Glasspool Malone and Robert Malone. These are two very influential advisors behind the scene of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Children's Health Defense. They put out multiple books by these people. And this is me actually taking pictures of them already knowing they were probably bad guys, but wasn't sure at this stage because this was at this CHD conference. So as far as I knew, they were all great. That's also where I met Whitney Webb. I've met Vera Sharav a few times, the Holocaust survivor lady. She wanted me to write a chapter for her book. I've met Kevin McCairn in person, and he's going to be an interesting person to talk about today because he's actually tied with Kevin McKernan and Steve Kirsch and all of these people who, again, are on Bobby's side, promoting Bobby as a guy who's going to bring us safe vaccines in 5 years. And so for people on the left, it's important to understand that while a lot of the people that are trapped by this theater think that they are anti-vaccine, the real message that is being sent here is that they just need to be made safe, and we might need to find the people that they're not safe for. And I really am pleading with you that we need to understand that the overclass, and again, that's the rich people nobody talk about, have placed these people already years ago in positions on the internet and elsewhere with nonprofits and whatever to manipulate our habits and opinions so that we ask the wrong questions and come to the wrong conclusions so that we would believe in anything. And they needed to have these people in place because that's what the pandemic is. Now, hopefully somebody isn't seeing this for the first time. And when I disappear, I want you to understand that the line that I'm looking at right here, the red is pneumonia, the yellow is identified or calculated flu deaths, the green is COVID, and the dark red here behind my head is all deaths. So every week in America, between 50,000 and 60,000 die every week. That's what this line is here. And now understand that the peaks here can be 70,000 people in 1 week, 70,000 people in 1 week, and then we skyrocket to 80,000 people. But if you notice, there's a trend there. And they asked us to believe anything. In fact, they got us to believe in a novel virus by simply using a PCR tool. And it's hard to hear this if you are on the left and you have not heard this yet, but PCR, as it's used in a university setting and as it would be used in a Nature paper, is not how PCR was used as a diagnostic. It is not how PCR is used as a diagnostic. And in fact, I think there's very good reason to believe, especially because of my experience as an expert in a few cases about this in 2020, that most or all of the testing in America, and probably the UK and other places, in 2020 and 2021 was fraudulent, fully fraudulent. Now, the way that it could be done is multiple ways. But the first and most important thing for you to understand is that anybody that you know that died of COVID in 2020, 2021, or 2022 in the hospital could have been murdered by using pure oxygen. Now, you are going to have to do this work on your own, but there are textbook chapters which explain how pure oxygen is dangerous. Even 80% pure oxygen is extremely dangerous. And even if it's used, it has to be humidified and blah, 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 blah. It needs to be monitored because as little as 2 hours of pure oxygen exposure can cause ARDS. And ARDS is acute respiratory distress syndrome, the primary symptomatic progression blamed on SARS and now SARS-CoV-2. And so what I'm suggesting to you is that murder in hospitals in America could have been used to create the illusion of a novel spreading pathogen. And if doctors were just dumb or naive or just took orders because, they had to stop the spread using ventilators and high pressure, then, ladies and gentlemen, they committed murder. If they withheld antibiotics because they were told from above that there's a viral pneumonia, a viral symptomology, and therefore antibiotics are inappropriate, we have a serious murder problem. And I think that what's very interesting is that people on the left and people on the right are completely unaware of this, because on the right, we've had meddlers getting us to chase other stories and pursue other mysteries instead of the mystery of why all these people died in such a uniquely isolated way. Look at this. When I get my head out of the way, look at this. We had it under control. And then we lost control right here in 2020, and then we got control back here at the end of 2021. That is not a biological phenomenon. That is a human-generated mythological phenomenon that they are lying about. It is murder and lies. And so, just to be brief about this, understand that PCR is not a useful diagnostic tool. The number of targets is important to look at between 2020 and 2022. The specificity of the amplicon that they chose and what exactly they chose, and whether or not they sequenced the amplicon or just use a fluorescent probe, and then what positive and negative controls were used. Most of the time, none were used. Another thing to consider is where all those products were made. Most of the tests that the UK and the United States based their tracking and tracing of the virus were all produced in China. Pure oxygen causing ARDS. This is very simple. Make sure that you understand the primary literature about this, even in monkeys, goes back to the 80s. And then no doctor should need an explanation here. You should just be ashamed of yourself if you were part of people working in hospitals that was using supplementary oxygen, that was using ventilation to stop spread, or was not using antibiotics under the pretense that antibiotics won't work for COVID. You are a murderer. And until you understand it and start to repent or confess or to feel any guilt at all, America's grandchildren will be enslaved by the mythology that was created on the back of your murder. And so I'm talking to doctors on the left, really. I'm talking to academics on the left that are still in universities. Do you understand that your universities were collecting your students' genetic data and selling it to the highest bidder, and that many universities that you people work for had contracts ahead of time so that in April of 2020, they were already negotiating so that when they came back in the fall, they were ready to go and they had places to sell those remnants? Do you know that? Because it's the truth. And the reason why we got here is because the conservative response to the pandemic was so malevolently orchestrated, controlled by a limited spectrum of debate, orchestrated by those people on these slides that you're probably not even familiar with. And one of the main certainties is that the PCR is now used as it's just a medical diagnostic standard. The FDA is just going to leave it unless the FDA is made to revisit PCR as a diagnostic, a medical device. Remember, the FDA is the only organization that could ever reverse the idea that hospitals can use PCR to track disease. Right now, it is just assumed that works like a charm. And the current now, it is a medical standard. And the only organization or power that can do anything about that on our behalf would be the FDA, because they regulate medical devices. So this medical standard without FDA approval was provided by these people. That was one of their main goals. If you see that already, then you can understand partially the message. The other parts of the message are going to be tough to get, but you'll get there in a couple shows. So the way that they fooled the right in America is with a bunch of happy little accidents. The way it works is that you think you're fighting, but in the end, it's always these people who rise. It's always these people who are on Tucker Carlson. And so no matter who's told who on this picture what, the aliens are coming, it's going to be a pole shift. These people already had their script. And so when they go on Tucker Carlson, they say the same stuff. When Jessica Rose does her stuff, she says the same stuff all the time, because that's a script. You can't expect to go on stage with a bunch of people in costume with effects and lighting crew and all on the same script and then influence that in any way, because that's not how it works. But that's what social media does. It makes you feel like you're on stage with them and you're having an influence on the show, but you don't have an influence on the show at all. And the more you have to say, the more that you can see clearly the show that's going on, the more these people will just ignore you. And it becomes a performance that, as long as you don't question it, it looks pretty convincing. As long as you just accept Robert Malone at face value and accept him as a hero, it looks convincing. If you accept Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as somebody who's just doing what he thinks is right rather than what he's told, it looks pretty convincing, I guess. But for me, it's over. This show is over, because I see it so clearly now what they've done to me over the last 5 years. How long I was played, how often I was played, how many different times another group of performers came in and chalked their hands up to stop and start the train. And I thought, wow, I've got to help these guys now kick ass. And it starts all the way with Denny Rancourt in May of 2020, controlling the debate about the evidence of spread. Controlling the debate about all-cause mortality, because the one thing that needed to be covered up, the most important thing that needs to be covered up, is that there was an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality across the West, from Scotland to America. We were getting more and more and more old people, and they were living longer and longer, which is more and more expensive. Believe it or not, life expectancy in the West was on the rise. But old people were becoming more numerous. The shape of the population pyramid was changing, and so we expected more people to die every year, because a larger percentage of our population was in the range of dying. You see? And so an anticipated rise in expected deaths, sculpted using murder, because you don't get really sharp peaks like this without some murder. Otherwise, this same pattern right here would just keep rising in this way, right? And you can see it's rising. You can see it because I've left the grid lines on here. That's 60,000 deaths per week. 60,000 deaths per week in 2013, 2014, 2015 was like a 1 or 2 or 3 week thing. Now In 2020, in 21, 22, 23, 60,000 deaths per week is almost the average. And so the number of deaths per week has gone up by almost 10,000 per week. And this anticipated rise in hospitalizations and ICU deaths and heart attacks and whatever else has been misconstrued as something that it's not, with the simple application of murder. Supplementary oxygen, ventilators, let the opioids go crazy. Who cares? It only catches idiots anyway. It's a group of people sitting at a table whose objective is to govern us across generations with a mythology about a novel virus and public health and vaccines. A myth of an RNA pandemic. And it's visible right here. Okay, right here in this graph, these are the big families after World War II. This is them aging. If you look at a population pyramid and you're not familiar with it, the women are on the right, the men are on this side. We have age on the rising axis here. So each bar represents an age group. And so you can see the population growing and you can see it aging. And what you can see from the beginning of this graph, if I start it over again, is that down here, this bump right here, I'm going to stop it for a second. This bump right here represents an anticipated, this is 2003, an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality. That when these people that are 40 to 44 in 2003 become 75 to 79, that's going to be a lot more people between the ages of 75 and 79 that are currently there in 2003, which is less than 4 million. If none of these people were to die, it could be as many as 11 million, which is a multiple-fold increase in the number of people requiring Medicaid, requiring a hospital visit, or dialysis, or an ambulance, or whatever. And at this time, in 2003, authorities in America were already telling us that the average cost of the last 6 months of someone's life on Medicaid and Medicare was about $500,000. So do the math. Even if we had the requisite, hospital beds and everything for this coming increase, we would have never been able to afford it given our system and our economic system. And so instead, they took a team of performers with elaborate costumes and CVs that they all agreed, Jessica Rose has 5 degrees. And they all stuck to the same script that had nothing to do with murder, nothing to do with an opioid crisis, and everything to do with a gain-of-function virus on our side. On your side, you guys were fine with the natural virus. It's just the way things are. But again, it's not the way things are, except if you take into account the population pyramid. So they lied to you about a natural virus being this phenomenon as well. Please understand that. The difference is that on the right in America, there are a lot of people that are very fired up that they think that they solved the mystery of a gain-of-function virus. And the reason why they think they solved that mystery is because of all these people that I'm blaming in this presentation. Where's my yep. And so this is visible, in Fortune magazine in 2021 or 2020 or 19, whenever this was. They've known this for a while, and they've hidden it because we acquiesced to social media at the start of the pandemic, and these people all said the mystery was being solved on X, and next thing you know, we are trapped by a Lollapalooza of liars. And this Lollapalooza of liars, internationally coordinated, trapped the conservative populist right. And I think it's worth you having this knowledge so that you can judge us correctly, that you can judge the right correctly and see that how important we are, how important our attention is, because they spent millions of dollars and used social media in very malevolent ways and orchestrated their story for 5 years to bring us here. That's why so many people support Trump and are related to Children's Health Defense or Brownstone or Door to Freedom or whoever else, all these things, all these people are somewhat united in their understanding of the pandemic only because of the actors on our side. Like Steve Bannon, who declared a lab leak in January of 2020. Steve Bannon is extremely pro-China, and Steve Bannon had a war room and still has a war room. Steve Bannon has CHD on all the time. That's Children's Self-Defense, the thing that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. changed its name from the World Mercury Project to Children's Self-Defense in 2018 as a kind of anti-vaccine health freedom movement. These people are all involved, again, because the FDA, formed by his dad and his dad, is the one thing that could save us, the one thing that might be able to reverse all of the biology that we are currently trapped in, including PCR and lateral flow and all this other crap that they use to define the endless pathogens that are around us. And that's why somebody with that level of CV needs to be involved. That's why Robert Malone was queued up. That's why Steve Kirsch is one of these clueless performers. This guy's a clueless performer. They all are witting and unwitting participants in this idea that a lab leak occurred and that it's time to, I don't know what, have a revolution, a phoenix. These people are not on our team. And these people, in coordination, may have bamboozled people like Big Tree or Hooker or even Robert F. Kennedy Jr. himself over the course of many years. And so America is in big trouble because we are on all sides controlled by theater like this. And the right in America has been focused on, like hard, for many years by a group of people, international and not, that are really traitors to our grandkids. And I know them because I've met them all and talked to them all and watched them ignore me for 5 years as traitorous Americans and non-Americans like Rose or Christoph or the Glasspool Malone. Edward Bernays told us. Noam Chomsky told us. These people are engaged in a limited spectrum of debate that has bamboozled the right in America. A lot of people are fooled by these people. And they need your help to see how they were fooled. This is the Lollapalooza of lies. This is the starting lineup of Team Worst Case Scenario. They made us believe in a lab leak. They turned an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality. Now, this is where it gets good. Oh, it's not going to play. As you know, Gigaohm Biological is only supported by viewers like you. Please go to gigaohmbiological.com and find a way to support this stream if you haven't already. And if you have, thank you very much. It really, it's big time right now. We really have, this is the time. We need to hit it hard now because the Lollapalooza of liars has never been as visible as it is. They are a team of performers. They have taken a known biological phenomenon like an eclipse, but in this case, an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality, and they have fooled all of us. They have fooled a planet. Not just a city, not just all the people that can stand at the base of a pyramid and watch. They have fooled everyone on Earth that uses social media into believing a pandemic occurred, when in reality it was an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality. And so with elaborate costumes and effects and all of them being on the same script, they fooled us into believing a pandemic occurred. And I know that's hard to hear, but an RNA cannot pandemic. There is no biology to support the idea that RNA can do it. I'm still confused as to why they told us this story all those years ago. It's just not possible. And I would love the chance to teach you the biology that edifies that idea. But for now, I guess I'm just going to try and prove to you that this phenomenon, this biological phenomenon that I say was misconstrued as a pandemic, is real. And so that's how it is, right? If they knew that the eclipse was coming, then they can pretend that they know when it's going to end. Okay, tell us that I'm all powerful and make the sun come back. And then they look at each other and smile because they know they're going to win right now. Not everybody believes, but most of them do. And that's all that matters, is that most of them believe. As John Locke wrote, day laborers and tradesmen, dairymaids, they need to be told what to believe. They cannot know. They need to be told what to believe. And what I'm suggesting to you is that these people, these performers, this Lollapalooza of liars that includes people like Russell Brand and this Malhotra guy, that's a photograph that he didn't want to take. He walked past me like 3 times in Georgia, very much avoiding me. And then finally I said, hey, should we take a picture together? He goes, oh, why not? And look at how he's pulling away. And that was an admission for me. He knew just from watching his body language, like I was the same pole of a magnet that, you know, it's the same with Pierre Corey. It was the same with James Lyons-Weiler. They all smile from a distance, but they're all in a hurry, even though it's a convention and it's lunchtime. Cowards and traitors, ladies and gentlemen, but nobody's in this narrative by chance. It's an anticipated rise in expected deaths, murder and lies, creates a myth of an RNA pandemic. Now, I have uploaded this PDF to my website. You can go there now and find it. I will see if I can do that too here. And then maybe I can switch over with this one. Yeah. So let's go to gigaohmbiological.com. I'm going to move this over here so you can see what I'm doing. Whoops. Just put it up. So here's gigaohmbiological.com. If you have your screen set big enough, I guess you can probably see. Maybe I can do it. Control minus. There. So if you have your screen set big enough, you can see that there's a link over here called Stuff. Also at the bottom, there's a link called Stuff. And if you click on that link, it'll take you to a place where you can download the Biology 101 textbooks that we are organizing into a course. But you can also find this random McKinsey report that was sent to me by a viewer anonymously a couple weeks ago. And I think it's a really interesting document to look at. I'm not going to, you can click here and it'll just open up on the web. You don't have to download it at all. Or you can download it there. And it says that confidential and proprietary, any use of this material without specific permission is, oh, sorry, I don't know what that is, ad blocks, it's the laptop. I never use it for that stuff. So I have this on my computer here, so I'll just put that up really quick. What's up? Yeah, it's fine if he comes in. And so we'll look at it on here. So this is a report that was generated in, it says here, January 2025. Hey, buddy. How are you? Little nerd burglar. Hey. Mike's in here again. Come us over here. Come over here so they can see you. Come. And they can see you better. Ooh, Chiba. Yes, now you can see how big he is. He's a little bigger than you thought. If I get away from the camera, then you can see how big he is. Panic means. Good boy. He's a good boy. He's a good boy. Thanks for dropping that link in. So if we go, that's not that one I want. That's the one I want. If we go to this document and we take a look at it, January 2025, and we scroll down, the McKinsey Global Institute, yada, 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 contents. Let's look at a glance here. And we're going to zoom in a little bit. So what I have been suggesting is that this phenomenon has been used against us, right? Oops, shoot. Oh, my goodness. I can't. Maybe I can do it this way. There we go. At a glance, falling fertility rates are propelling major economies toward population collapse in this century. 2/3 of humanity lives in countries with fertility rates below the replacement rate of 2.1 children per family. By 2100, populations in some major economies will fall by 20 to 50%. So think about what they just said there, because by 2100 sounds like a long ways away. But if a major economy's population is going to fall by 50% by 2100, then somewhere between now and 2100, there's already a very, very, very big problem. Age structures are inverting from pyramids to obelisks. Interesting, as the number of people, older people grows and the number of young people shrinks. The first wave of this demographic shift is, I'm just going to make myself a little bit bigger because there's a lot of dead space here. The first wave of this demographic shift is hitting advanced economies and China, where a share of people of working age will fall to 59% in 2050 from 67% today. Later waves will engulf younger regions within 1 or 2 generations. Oh, so they think on multi-generational timescales. And they make calculations like that, and they have for a while. Sub-Saharan Africa is the only exception to this. Interesting, they also didn't have any COVID there. Consumers and workers will be older and increasingly in the developing world. Seniors will account for 1/4 of global consumption by 2050. Seniors, those are people who die and in the meantime soak up all kinds of money and don't pay taxes. They soak up all kinds of money and they don't pay taxes. You see, they're not generating income if they're seniors. And so what's necessary for our capitalist economy are pyramids, not obelisks. That hurt my shoulder, darn it. Calculus of economies cannot support existing income and retirement norms. Something must give. What? The current calculus of economies cannot support existing income and retirement norms. Something must give. This is exactly what I'm saying. This is a problem that somebody like Ted Turner knew was going to be a problem 25 years ago. And a lot of people have been predicting that unmanaged, this could bankrupt a lot of Western economies. The first wave countries across advanced economies and China, GDP per capita growth could slow by 0.4% annually on average from 23 to 50 and up to 0.8% in some countries, unless productivity growth increases by 2 to 4 times or people work 1 to 5 times more per week. Or you could just bring in immigrants. Retirement systems might need to channel as much as 50% of labor income to fund a 1.5 time increase in the gap between aggregate consumption and income of seniors. Later wave countries take note. How come nobody's talking about this in the largest population in the world, in China? How come? How come we're not talking about it, what it will be in India, the largest population in the world? How come nobody was talking about this as a biological phenomenon, but Tony Fauci was in front of us in 2017 and saying with certainty that there will be a challenge, a global pandemic challenge in this administration? Confronting the consequences of demographic change, societies enter uncharted waters. Absent action, younger people will inherit lower economic growth and shoulder the cost of more retirees while the traditional flow of wealth between generations erodes. Not for everybody. Long-standing work practices and social contracts must change. More fundamentally, countries will need to raise fertility rates to avert depopulation. A societal shift without precedence in modern history. I mean, what more evidence do you need that we are right? What more evidence could I provide that would convince you? Families across the globe are having fewer and fewer children, but for a while after World War II, they had a metric ton of them. And that's the biological phenomenon that is being used to create a mythology that's based on nothing, based on an endless variety of signals of DNA and RNA in the background that they have misconstrued as evidence of spreading novel pathogens, instead of just telling us that our population pyramids are changing and manifesting themselves in this way. You can go through this and you can see that the people are not having kids, and that's causing fertility rates to go down. No matter where you measure them, they are very, very low. 1.6 is extremely low. 1.4 is an incredibly decreasing population. That's extraordinary. Falling fertility rates here. And now here are the population pyramids. Look at China. Look at China. Here's North America, just like we showed it to you. Western Europe looks worse. They all had the same problem to manage, ladies and gentlemen. They all had the same problem to manage. And that's why they all agreed at the beginning of the pandemic to go right on message, because China and all of Western society had this problem to manage. And they turned it into the pandemic. And they turned it into the pandemic by agreeing to argue about a lab leak or a natural virus, agreeing to argue about the potential for gain of function, agreeing to argue about the fact that maybe the vaccine is making the virus get worse. So I hope you'll download that and check it out. I think it's really important. It's a good document I'm still working my way through it, and I'm hoping that other people will do it and show me what they find as well, because it's all work we got to do together. Share this with your family and friends, and ask them why this isn't discussed by Dodd or by Nick Hudson or by any of these people who purport to be mathematicians. How is this possible? A McKinsey Global Institute report, and yet Denny Rancour says that the population pyramid has nothing to do with it. How is it possible that a guy who works for a life insurance company like that Dodd character says that this has nothing to do with it? How is it possible that Nick Hudson of Panda has ignored this since I put it in front of him and then blocked me, basically? It's because they're all part of this Lollapalooza of liars, and they really trapped us on the right with their elaborate scheming and their substacking. It was terrible. And it goes all the way back to 2013 when this child boy was put on, live CNN and everybody agreed that this was some kind of smart kid with smart opinions and some kind of patriot. It's the same reason why Brett Weinstein is in front of us right now. It's the same reason why this guy might be a guy you like. This guy might be a guy you like. But understand this very clearly. He's been playing the same game that Mary Holland has been playing. Mary Holland of Children's Health Defense first became prominent with an argument against Paul Offit in 2015. And ever since then, they have been ineffectively arguing against each other as like a bad divorced couple, performing this show to make sure that no useful resistance to public health as an authority or public health has an idea, or the technocracy that they want to bring in where everybody just has to trust the experts. That was what they were doing already in 2015 by establishing people like Mary Holland and Paul Offit as potentially the experts. And so we're all trapped by the same performance. And I'm begging you to see that there are no good guys in this story, because none of the good guys have the message. And now what's really extraordinary is even on The View, the people on The View are repeating his name, Steve Bannon, saying, wow, he said that, he's a populist. Wow, I kind of agree with that too. And that's part of the bamboozlement. If you didn't see it, see it. Because in 2 or 3 months, they could also be saying that Russell Brand is pretty smart, or that Pierre Corey's a hero. And then you'll know. And it'll probably be too late. That's also the same reason why Woody Harrelson went on Joe Rogan to tell about how Hollywood was bamboozled and pressured, and how Hollywood was seminal to staging this narrative, because they could pressure everybody there, and everybody gives into pressure in Hollywood. And so it was a joke to create that narrative and enforce it in a Hollywood set. And of course, that has trickle-down effects. And so one of the things that we did in my last show was we looked at this video where all these people get together and kind of agree, it seems, that Andrew Kaufman is the dude with the message about the death of the germ theory, and is the best explainer, and is often, you can see him in the video, really excited about the limited spectrum of debate that he's going to curate. Now, that was just one video. But I have made bigger accusations on this screen where I accused Tom Cowan, Andrew Kaufman, Christine Massey, Kevin McCairn, Mark and Sam Bailey of all being part of the same international scheme, where they agreed to say each other's name and to make memes about each other and even go on podcasts and talk about and debate with each other, and make sure that if their followers found anybody else, that they found each other for the whole duration of the pandemic. And never once have they said murder as MDs. Never once have they gone beyond this no virus, culturing and isolation and purification thing, which I agree is an incredibly important debate. But at some point in time, you're going to have to say that if the virology is fake, then how did they get away with it? And they got away with it with murdering people. And these people have never said that. And that is a horrible, consistent pattern in their track record. These people from New Zealand could easily have said 4 years ago that they are using PCR to justify murdering people that they knew were otherwise going to die, so that they could make these fancy peaks and blame it on a virus that we can show you doesn't exist, but they've never said it. And so this staged illusion is really easy to see when you start to look at the calendar of these people. So Andrew Kaufman, and that's who I want to talk about today in reference to some of these people in the sense of tying them all together. I want to tie Kevin McCairn and Kevin McKernan of the Human Genome Project right directly to Andrew Kaufman as all one big malevolent show. And so the way that I'm going to do it is just show you the timeline. Now, I'm sure this photograph from 2019 is innocent, where he's shaking the hand of Andrew Cuomo in New York and accepting a state grant to make biometric monitoring systems for the prisons in New York. This is just what he was doing before the pandemic, which is all good. Andrew Kaufman, the lecture that we just watched the other day, is here in February of 2021. And maybe one of the two things you want to realize about that video is he's incorrectly explaining how the mRNA is being manufactured, and he's incorrectly stating that it's being printed, which is an interesting thing for him to say and not explain. And maybe we can get into that in another show, but suffice it to say that from my perspective, that's an extraordinary admission that he's been given a script that he probably doesn't even understand how it will unfold. So keep in mind that the reason why I heard of this fella, and I'm going to just tap over here for a second so I can move this down. Oops, shoot. Slightly. There we go. So again, Andrew Kaufman, the video we watched yesterday, but it was actually in March of 2020 that I first heard of Andrew Kaufman from a guy by the name of Kevin McCairn, who was in the middle of the last screen. He's some character that is in Tokyo or in Japan that was a neuroscientist, and I think was recruited into this mess in order to be one of my handlers. And the reason why I say that is because he contacted me earlier than anyone else. And his story for contacting me was that he worked with someone who I worked with at the University of Pittsburgh during his PhD. And so that made our connection seem really interesting and neato. And so, of course, I went on stream with him, and that would turn out to be on stream with a bunch of George Webb associates who I wouldn't find out until much later was obviously an idiot. But Kevin McCairn is the one who brought me into those streams, and in 5 consecutive weekends always reminded me that the no virus position and its proponent, the most important proponent to oppose, was Andrew Kaufman. And so that's not for nothing. It's not by accident. That's for real. Now, it wouldn't be until after Rixey came to my house in 2022 that Kevin McCairn would go on Tim Truth's podcast with Sam Bailey's husband, Mark Bailey, one of the guys on the previous screen, and have a very vigorous debate about whether or not the germ theory was real and whether or not SARS-CoV-2 or other viruses were real. And it was a ridiculous thing. And it was so ridiculous that at the time I did a show and was kind of like, what in the hell is McCairn doing? He totally blew it. And that really ruined our friendship and made him do all kinds of terrible videos about me. And even in one sense, I think Rixey even went to Tokyo after that and started streaming with him and, I don't know, organizing the experiments they're doing now or whatever. I don't know what. But that all happened after Tim Truth. And after that episode, I was like, dude, Kevin McCairn's an idiot. Like, he blew it. There's a lot better way to tell it. And then despite that happening, that same guy came to America, toured around America with Rixey and a supporter of Housatonic Live, Karma Doc, who I've met one time in person as well, and came to my house in Pittsburgh, tried to come to my house in Pittsburgh, even though he knew already for months and months I thought he was a clown. I'd broken off contact. He'd gotten Rixey fired. It's so weird of an admission for him to be in contact with me, to send emails and say he's just going to come to Pittsburgh in light of all that had happened in the months past. But he did. The guy who told me 2 years earlier, almost 3 years earlier, that Andy Kaufman was a bad guy and also hooked me up with operatives of George Webb. And so what's interesting is that Steve Kirsch had Andrew Kaufman on his podcast the week that I was presenting at Red Pill with Andrew Kaufman. I presented in the session after Andrew Kaufman, and Andrew Kaufman was on Steve Kirsch's podcast the day before. That's not coincidence. It's also not coincidence that in February of 2025, 7 months later, Kevin McKernan and Kevin McCairn, the guy I've known since March 2020 as a liar, was on Steve Kirsch's podcast as well. It's not by accident. And even if you think that this is not enough to convince you that Andrew Kaufman and Kevin McCairn and Kevin McKernan and Steve Kirsch are all part of the same sort of traitorous international network that is part of the controlled demolition of America, let me remind you that Kevin McKernan was on my stream in December of 2021. Let me remind you that I was also on a podcast with Kevin McKernan and a lot of Steve Kirsch's steering committee, including Stephanie Seneft and John Bodwin and Jessica Rose in 2020. That's wrong. 2023 in March. Sorry, I got to change that. This is what takes so long when you're doing these things. So ding, 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 ding. There we go. March 2023. And so there's been a lot of connections here and a lot of times that I've had contact with these people. And so it's not just one. The other thing I could drop in here is that Steve Kirsch wanted me to evaluate Kevin McCairn's grant proposal in 2022. And we had a nice little text exchange on my phone about that. And so there again, he even offered to send me to Tokyo to help him work and help him do those experiments. So this is all one weird little network because Stephanie Seneff was on Kevin McCairn's podcast in April of 2024. Like a year after I was on a podcast with Stephanie Seneff and Kevin McKernan and told them all about how infectious clones are the way that virology is faked. The really crazy part is Kevin McCairn and Kevin McKernan were featured on a Life Site News article together in 2024 in March. And this Life Site News article where, Robert Malone has been and Rose has been and they've all been, says in a recent video, neuroscientist Dr. Kevin McCairn, who was medically retired at the beginning of the pandemic and who hasn't published anything of report in his entire career, explains that the mRNA technology used in the COVID jabs is causing the same frame shifting that prior research indicates leads to harmful prion production. And there's a video in this where he's actually speaking to the Health Alliance Australia. And in the same article, there is a head nod to Kevin McKernan and a video that's no longer available because it was on YouTube, where he talks about COVID vaccines and genome integration. So these guys were promoted in Australia together as two experts. And then think about when that is. When is that? Where is it? There it was. It's Life Site in March 24th, but in April 24th, then Kevin McCairn has Stephanie Seneff on, I don't know, to rehearse. What's going on there?
Hey, Dr. Wilson here, and I'm back to debunk some more COVID-19 misinformation.
Now, it would be crazy, right?
This week, we're going to debunk Dr. Andrew Kaufman. Now, it appears that Dr. Kaufman does have a real medical...
That's really interesting that in October 2020, actually also Debunked the Funk made a whole video about Andrew Kaufman. Wow! Isn't that crazy?
...degree. But it also appears that he didn't pay attention at all in any of his molecular biology classes, because he's here to tell us what I think is one of the worst COVID-19 theories out there. Buckle in, because we're about to hear what he has to say.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Andy Kaufman.
Now think about how remarkable it is that this guy is allowing Andy Kaufman to present on his podcast and then going to critique it. He never did that for me. He came on my stream and never posted it on his own website, didn't edit it down like this. This is an edited down, produced version for Andy Kaufman. Interestingly, there's a Substack from a husband and wife team that's making excuses for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. right now, and he also did a video about them in 2021. And so if you see that they're all promoting the same people, good or bad, supporting or not supporting, critiquing or giving accolades, is all the same thing if it's a part of a limited spectrum of debate that you and I are both trapped in. And so he's going to let this guy talk?
I've been talking a lot lately about this viral pandemic, and I've learned some things lately that have helped me develop a theory, and I think I know what is really going on here, so I want to give that information to everyone.
All right, I'm all ears, and I'm ready to be blown away with science.
So how did they actually claim to have proved that a virus caused this illness?
Easy. They found patients sick with a mysterious illness that wasn't being caused by any known virus or bacteria.
Now, of course, he's just going to rattle off all of the side of Fauci and virology, and we tested and we found and we did it the way we do it, and he's going to use all of the papers that probably a lot of people on the left believe in and a lot of people on the right don't believe in because of these meddlers. And so we've both been set up, both sides have been set up to believe that there is a mystery to solve. One believes that it's being exaggerated, it's a natural phenomenon that's always been there, and this is just the latest thing that happens when there's a lot of people on the planet. And the other side thinks that they're lying about it and they're covering up a lab leak because they make this stuff. And they're both wrong. And Andrew Kaufman does not provide a useful alternative to either of those, and to either of those. He provides a very ridiculous alternative that answers no questions, and most importantly, doesn't say that because viruses are fake, they used murder and lies about an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality. This guy's not going to be smart enough to figure it out either, of course, because he's not allowed to. He's staying on a script. He's a Canadian guy who used to live in America and has been on script from the beginning. He's supported by the government of Canada. And this guy is supported by the government of Canada and made a full show about Andrew Kaufman, the guy that was on Steve Kirsch's podcast at the end of last year, the guy that was on Steve Kirsch's podcast just before Kevin McCairn and Kevin McKernan were on Steve Kirsch's podcast.
And instead they found genetic.
Now, this next one, Fred, that I have for you is really shocking, okay? So I want you to remember this guy as Professor Dave, and Professor Dave Explains is on YouTube, and Professor Dave Explains was the guy that I featured a couple shows back. Excuse me, my ear itches. A couple shows back. Oh, yeah, I have them in my shirt pocket. A couple shows back about Brett Weinstein, and he did it's a wonderful video where he really demolishes Brett Weinstein and his brother and demonstrates how they were set up to be where they are, and that they're charlatans. And it's a very compelling video, and I really enjoyed it a lot. But I also presented him to you because he is a staunch left of center, fully dead on balls narrative science communicator. I'm a science coach. I'm a biology coach. I'm trying to give you things to think about, questions to ask, mysteries to solve that will get you to understand a new Biology 101. This guy is firmly planted in the traditional Biology 101 of Campbell biology that's taught at all the universities in America and at all the med schools in America. And this, in February of 2021, is his, everything you needed to know and forget about vaccines. And so I'm going to play the first 6 minutes and just point out some of the incredible dead on balls narrative that, of course, you would expect from a guy who has 4 million subscribers on YouTube. But what you're going to see after he explains vaccines and why you shouldn't question them, you're going to not believe where he goes next. Have a little patience.
Hey everyone, so given my recent debunking activity, I get lots of requests for topics to cover, and the one I get the most is vaccines. Now, unlike the obscure hoaxes I normally debunk, vaccines are something that the entire population interfaces with and has an opinion about. These opinions vary due to differing levels of education as well as exposure to misinformation, which ranges from insane lies to more subtle propaganda. So in putting this together, I wanted to address as many of the false talking points that are floating around as humanly possible, in the hopes that any vaccine skeptics who may be watching will be able to briefly suspend their convictions and listen to the other side. Now, I know that the COVID vaccine is on the forefront of everyone's mind, and I will get to that towards the end, but I wanted to approach this in a more general way. So I'm going to start out by briefly explaining what vaccines are and how they work. This may be review for most, but we need to do this for context. Then I will address every bit of misinformation I have ever heard about vaccines. And finally, I'll wrap things up with the new COVID vaccines and some common concerns about them. Hopefully everyone will learn something new and...
He recently had a 10-year anniversary where he showed pictures from his early filming. And this guy was already very, very well supported with full studio level cameras and everything, and a shoot and edits and editors and producers already from the very beginning. So don't think of this guy as somebody who was riding his bike to the University of Pittsburgh and decided to do journal club on his bike using a GoPro. That's me. This is a guy who's always wanted to be famous and was in music videos and in theater school or in production with the intent of being someone and not necessarily knowing what he was going to be. I'm just a biologist trying to be a biologist in any way that I can, And I was a naive idiot, tenure-seeking biologist, academician before the pandemic. So I think my story is more compelling than a guy like this, but still, there are lots of people like this. Science communicators are not scientists. They don't necessarily know for sure the science that they are communicating. It's very different than being a science teacher. A science communicator expects very minimum or no questions at all. A science teacher or a science coach is expecting to be challenged and is expecting to have to teach. You see the difference here, right? Because he considers himself a science communicator of the finest proportions.
Perhaps forget some lies as well. So let's get started. What are vaccines? Well, I cover the history of their development in some detail over in my History of Drugs series, so for the full story, head over there. But for those in a hurry, I will summarize as quickly as possible. Throughout all of human history, the most common cause of death has always been infectious pathogens, which means a microorganism that can cause disease. The Black Death.
And so already he's doing it, right? Infectious pathogens is a bigger umbrella than needs to be cast if you wanted to tell the truth, but he's casting that big umbrella to make sure that he can throw anything he wants at you, including viruses of all kinds.
Which wiped out half of Europe in the 14th century, was caused by Yersinia pestis, a species of bacterium. Even bigger killers, by pure numbers at least, have been tuberculosis, also caused by a bacterium, smallpox, caused by a virus, and dozens of other horrifically deadly diseases that are now either non-existent or easily treatable. For the longest time, we had no clue what caused...
Almost all of those were bacterial, right? Or a bacterial toxin. Just make sure you know that.
These diseases, as we couldn't see these organisms. Our incantations and primitive medical techniques had no effect, and we were totally helpless against them, apart from the faculties of the immune system we all possess. So how does the immune system deal with pathogens? Well, this is immensely complicated, and I have just begun an immunology series which will cover all aspects of the immune system in significant detail. But again, to summarize the basics as briefly as possible, once something like a virus infects host cells, some of its surface proteins are recognized as foreign by immune cells, and in response to these foreign markers, called antigens, the immune system produces other proteins called antibodies.
So he shows it here that there are other cells involved, but then he simplifies it to the point that antibodies are the end product of immunity, and that is absolutely wrong. And it doesn't matter whether his other videos go into immense detail. If your summary slide is bullshit and your summary simplification is bamboozling or disarming or renders your listeners that don't go any further helpless, then it's not a very good summary. It would be much better to say RNA cannot pandemic here, right?
These are able to recognize that specific antigen and bind to it, tagging it for destruction by other immune cells that eat up invaders.
And so here you can already see the combinatorial problem that you can see in any cartoon of the virus. You have to block every receptor, right? So every receptor needs to be blocked. If every virus has like 50 spike proteins on it and we had 50 antibodies for every spike protein that was in circulation plus a few extra, there'd be so many spike protein antibodies in our bloods that our blood would hardly flow. And if we had to have antibodies like this for all the viruses that we've ever encountered, our blood would be like peanut butter.
Once these antibodies have formed, they stick around as long as the invaders are still active, and then slowly disappear from circulation. But there are also specialized cells called memory cells that can remember how to generate that specific antibody, sometimes for several decades, such that if the invader infects again at a later time, the immune system can mount a much faster response to the antigen and eradicate it before significant infection occurs.
Now, what's funny is that he doesn't seem to realize that he's talking really about damage-associated molecular patterns, because again, the antigen is deemed dangerous during the initial recognition process, and that is not a unique pathogen memory, but it's looking for toxic motifs that need to be neutralized, and if any toxic motifs are identified, the body might produce antibodies to those. And so then exposure to that same toxic motif again can provoke the production of antibodies quite quickly. But again, it's not the presence of the pathogen, it is the presence of the toxin that matters. And this guy, although I'm sure he could understand it, he's not going to understand it because the textbooks don't say it and the papers don't say it and the reviews don't say it unless you read them and then try to understand them. If you just read what they say and take it at face value, you'll never see the real pattern that the immune system data and all the data that the observations that we've made point to. You just won't see it. That's not his job.
This is why most infectious agents render a person immune from successive infections, if the immune system reacts quickly enough to the first attack and the person recovers, which obviously is not always the case. Now, before we had any clue about the immune system, we had already recognized immunity as a concept, since we were able to see that people usually didn't get infected by the same thing twice. That's why crude forms of immunization have been practiced for over 1,000 years, like a technique called variolation, which was used to fight smallpox, in which people were deliberately exposed to someone else's smallpox scabs, through a cut in the skin or inhaling up the nose. But this was really just infecting oneself with smallpox, and it was a risky procedure with a significant mortality rate.
That is probably untrue. Not the significant mortality rate, but the idea that you're infecting yourself. I'm not sure that's the case. What you might be doing is just exposing yourself to a toxic protein, an immunogenic protein, and that immunogenic protein could provoke an immune response or not. It could provoke an anaphylactic response or not. And the anaphylactic response, of course, will be different if you inject. And so what he is pretending here is that interacting with the immune system at a barrier like your lungs or at your gut lining or in your skin is primitive forms of vaccination. And the best form of vaccination is intramuscular injection, which is, I believe, absolutely the opposite of the truth. And any doctor worth their salt should be able to see this.
Then, in the 18th century, a man named Edward Jenner innovated this approach. He used a slight variant of the smallpox virus called the cowpox virus, which was not as dangerous, and exposed patients to that instead, finding that it bestowed them...
And exposed patients to that instead. He didn't intramuscularly inject it.
...them with immunity against smallpox as well. He had no idea what viruses even were, let alone that this worked because of the structural similarity of the two viruses, which caused antibodies to be generated that would recognize both viruses.
Now, that's not because of the structural similarities being confusing to the immune system. It is because the immune system tries to generalize across molecular threats and across molecular motifs so that it makes as few memories as possible. Because an incorrect immune memory could lead to disaster. And so he's acting like, oh, the clever people figured out that these two viruses were similar. No, the clever immune system works that way, that signals, whether they're can be called viruses or whether they're just pathogenic proteins produced by bacteria that we're symbiotic with or exposed to. This kind of thing can be misconstrued as a high fidelity biology of viruses that it's not, with the simple and spectacular commitment to lies, the simple certainty because I read it. Even if I don't understand it or have never really thought very deeply about it, you just accept it and get pissed.
Thus priming the immune system for smallpox infection without having to be infected with smallpox. But even without this knowledge, the new vaccination technique worked wonderfully with a substantially lower risk of mortality, and it was soon adopted worldwide.
And that's not injection, it's variolation. They were scraping it into the skin with a little tiny fork.
Eventually leading to the complete eradication of smallpox by 1980. So with this earliest example, we can see the basic mechanism by which all vaccines operate. Over time, the approach was refined, but the core principle was always the same. Expose the immune system to some particle. This could be a weaker analog of a deadly virus. It could be an attenuated version of the virus, meaning that it is modified so that it has difficulty infecting and replicating within cells. It could even be just the isolated surface protein that the virus uses to gain entry to cells. Once any of these things enter the bloodstream, the immune system goes through the slow process of the primary immune response. And then, if that pathogen is ever truly encountered, the body is already prepared to destroy it immediately via antibodies and the secondary immune response, doing so before infection can even occur. Obviously, this was the ultra-condensed explanation, and with some knowledge of biochemistry and microbiology, we could talk for 1,000 hours about what we just said. But at its essence, that's what vaccines do. And this is no small feat. The average life expectancy across the world was only around 30, all the way until the turn of the 20th century. The main factor in this figure more than...
Think about how silly it is that he uses life expectancy here. It's just the wrong number, but that's all right.
Doubling in less than a century is our recent ability to prevent infection with vaccines and eradicate pathogens with modern drugs.
Eradicate pathogens with modern drugs. Understand that this enchantment is semantic. And we were semantically enchanted by the people on our side, and their side, your side, if you're listening from the left, is enchanted by similar people. Just the enchantment is different. What this guy should have told you is the vast majority of lives around the world have been saved by antibiotics, not drugs. Antibiotics. If you can't hear that this guy saying vaccines and pharmaceutical drugs instead of antibiotics and sanitation is a malevolent, misleading representation of the wonderful contributions that pharmaceutical drugs have made to our lives, you are enslaved in the same way that people who believe in Donald Trump and Alex Jones are enslaved just by different myths and different enchanters.
Okay, so with that out of the way, what are some of the talking points that are brought up against vaccines and their use? Well, let's start with the most absurd narrative I've heard. And from a scientific standpoint, that would be outright denial that pathogens like viruses even exist at all. That's right. Some people say that infectious microorganisms are not real. This is astounding. We've been able to see bacteria in microscopes since the 17th century, and we've been looking at viruses in electron microscopes since the early 20th century. There are tens of thousands of people all over the world whose job it is to study these things. They're called microbiologists and virologists, and the things they study do exist. A slight modification of this view is that viruses exist, but they don't cause disease. Again, this is complete nonsense. We observe them. We culture them, which means allowing them to infect cells and multiply. We study in great detail the precise mechanisms by which they gain access to a cell and force that cell to express the viral genome. We have sequenced the genomes of all the viruses we study. We know what protein each gene codes for and what each protein does.
Think about that. We know what each protein codes for, what each gene codes for, and what each protein does. That is a magnificent line of bullshit. It's ridiculous to say that. But he just said it as confidently as he said that the sky is blue. That's the difference between a science coach and a science communicator. This guy's just ramming it down your throat.
We deliberately allow things called retroviruses to infect cells to perform medical techniques like gene therapy. We know what viruses are and how they work. The most damaging pusher of this lie as of late has been a psychiatrist turned naturopath named Andrew Kaufman. He is one of many personalities that has gained traction on YouTube by peddling blatant lies of an absurd nature, like that appendicitis is actually constipation. He maintains that the coronavirus which causes COVID does not exist, nor do the viruses that cause AIDS, hepatitis, measles, and other viral diseases. He claims that what scientists are observing are actually exosomes, or tiny vesicles ejected from a cell that are of human origin and contain human DNA. There is nothing to even discuss here. That is wrong.
There are no exosomes. There are no signalings at this time scale, or what? You know, that's the crazy part about this guy. Is so malevolently a part of this, he doesn't even know it.
COVID is caused by a novel coronavirus. Some say it has never been isolated. That's wrong. It's trivial to isolate and has been done countless times. Its genome has been sequenced, which again is trivial. Some like to say that viruses don't exist because they don't fulfill Koch's postulates.
So now as he goes
Well,
on,
Robert
let's
Koch
see where
didn't
else
know
he
that
goes.
Viruses are incompetent celebrities, and the damage had been done. With a lawyer named Richard Barr knew he could cash in if he could get someone qualified to provide some evidence for this link. So he found a gastroenterologist who had already published something on this hypothesis, Wakefield, and paid him about £500,000 to produce a study that would give him the green light to sue. Wakefield got to work, and in 1998 he published a study in The Lancet claiming that the
Now understand what I'm suggesting to you. Just like it looks very obvious that Andrew Kaufman was inserted at the beginning of the pandemic, was playing along with George Webb and Robert Malone and Steve Kirsch and Kevin McCairn, all of them on the same team from the very beginning. That's why they all agree to mention him. That's why the Canadian-funded Debunk the Funk operation mentioned him. That's why this guy with multiple million followers mentions him and Andrew Wakefield. Andrew Wakefield being the guy that has multiple books by Skyhorse Publishing, the publishing arm of CHD that got Robert F. Kennedy Jr. where he is today in front of you as a health advocate. That book guy, that's the one that he cites, not Brandy Vaughn that you've never heard of, or Brian Hooker or Tony Bark or any of these people who say it much more clearly. He cites the people that the populist right has been using in the UK and America as a underground political movement for more than a decade. We've been trapped by foreigners brought to America to recycle their shtick. And that's why this guy is mentioning the exact story of Andrew Wakefield and is able to use real facts and real historic numbers to characterize him as an operation. Because they've agreed to use him. That's always why he was there. That's why he was elevated in the way that he was elevated, in exactly the way described here. Because it's all part of the same show. Otherwise, this guy would not be covering Andrew Kaufman in such detail or Andrew Wakefield in such detail in February of 2021.
MR vaccine, which inoculates against measles, mumps, and rubella, is linked to a number of gastric disorders.
And so this illusion of consensus where these people agree to get together and meddle with my ability to make a living for my family, my ability to share the truth and say that I'm a meddler, instead of saying and pointing out that somebody like Jessica Rose with hundreds of thousands of more followers is posing as somebody that she's not. They've all ignored her, even though she has a lucrative Substack, probably makes $10,000 or $20,000 a month from that. Plus she gets maybe $4,000 a month from the Brownstone Institute, another $4,000 or $5,000 a month as a senior fellow from the Independent Medical Alliance that used to be the FLCCC. These people haven't sacrificed anything. They've moved on to bigger and better pastures, and they're building multi-generational wealth based on these new forms of social media manipulation and amplification. And they all know it. That's why he had a book, and they have a book, and he's got books, and she'll have a book. She's Epigirl from the SPARS pandemic exercise, and these people are all part of the narrative that keep her at that position of power and agree to ignore her.
Sorry, yes, go ahead.
Are you going to do the CD and tape analogy?
That's why at some point in time she thought I was great, and then it was over. Just like these people, they ignored me, and then suddenly I was terrible. Just like I was the expert that made this book possible, and then I got fired because I'm telling the truth. I don't think any of these other people are. I think they are part of it wittingly or unwittingly, and they are part of this limited spectrum of debate that they are using to control, demolish America. That's why this no virus person was promoted by that fake sort of opposition to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Understand that she and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Judy Mikovits all spoke in front of the same church in 2020. They all know each other. They're all connected to a church in California. It's not by accident. It's because this is how we are governed. It's also not by accident that this guy's been inserted in, that we're listening to the nonsense of Dr. Drew. It's also not by coincidence that this person is promoted or that these people are promoted on Piers Morgan. The right in America has been trapped by a theater of the most macabre, probably orchestrated by Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and supporters of Trump and Steve Bannon and the people who produced Q. It's all the same fake populist movement designed to control the populist right of America. And these are traitors from the ruling class that are helping it happen. That's why they're Democrats. That's why they're Catholics. That's why they're Khazarian Jews. These people are not Americans. They have other loyalties. They are traitors to our children, and they are coercing us into teaching this mythology to our children. We can't let it happen. Everybody's got a timeline, and my timeline involves me learning and trying to teach other people and running into wall after wall after wall, just like Brandy Vaughn ran into wall after wall after wall after wall. If I'd have found out about Brandy Vaughn a lot earlier, I might not have been able to do what I'm doing. But Brandy Vaughn in 2016 had her first anti-vaccine billboard up where all vaccines contain toxins. Learn the risk. I guess I should have let that play. And these people that are promoted in front of her and are still being promoted as heroes were put in place on purpose to govern a mythology about the vaccine schedule that they would never really question it. And the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, that it goes all the way to an MIT professor who's been meddling with all of us for this long. It goes all the way back to an activist.
Make no mistake that the other side, without a doubt, do not want the public, the people, the parents, to hear the stories of the unvaccinated.
So nobody wants you to know, the right or the left, that independent of your faith in vaccines, people who aren't vaccinated, dogs that aren't vaccinated, are healthier, live longer. Children that are unvaccinated are extraordinarily different, especially on an average. And this is a truth that will wake you up, as has woken up many people on our side on the health freedom right. It can wake you up too, because that is the reality. The reality is exactly as Brandy Vaughn said, not this person is being recycled. This person is part of the Andrew Wakefield illusion in the UK. She was used by them in the UK to be a pretty face to that neutered message, in the same way that she came to the United States and was a pretty face on that neutered message that stood in front of Brandy Vaughn at that critical time at the beginning of the pandemic. And she went along with it because I guess she's more loyal to her UK people than she is to her Americans. And these people are loyal to some other global power than they are to America. They are willing to take from us, but they will not fight for our grandchildren. That's why in 2019, she could still say it. In this video, she says the real truth are the unvaccinated kids. What they really want us to argue about is Andrew Wakefield and the measles vaccine, which conveniently, ladies and gentlemen, in America, we are now arguing about 6 years later. It's not by accident that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was blamed for a measles outbreak in Samoa in Rolling Stone. It's not for nothing that that Mary Holland and Paul Offit first met 10 years ago. It's not for nothing. It's because that is how we are governed. And if you want to go along with it, you're going to have to follow their narrative. At some point in time, Polly decided to go along with it. I don't really know why. I don't know how she was pressured, but for sure she decided to go along with it. Just like this guy, James Lyons Weiler, went along with it. And that's why at the beginning of the pandemic, he knew so much about the virus, it was ridiculous, because they're fake. And these people were put in place to control the right in America. We are victims of this elaborate theater coordinated by Human Genome Project Research and Development Director Kevin McKernan and former DITRA employee and advisor Robert Malone. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. might be just a patsy in this. He might not know any better. He might just have to take the advice of the people he's surrounded by. And that's why he does this promotion of not Brandy Vaughn, but of Judy Mikovits at the beginning of the pandemic. Because it's all part of one show to trap the populist right and to manipulate America into accepting this worst case scenario. And anybody that can explain it is put on the bench. And they stood in front of people like me that could have explained it to you and explained it to my family and friends that they were going to lie about this. And they've done it. They've done it in spades, ladies and gentlemen. Please know that. They've done it in spades. I'm just going to fast forward to this. Nothing is in this narrative by chance. Everyone has a timeline. I would really like you to share mine with as many people as you can, because it reveals so many of these people for the meddlers that they are. I have wonderful stories and texts from all of these people and more, because all of these organizations are fake. All of these organizations are either fake or sabotaged, because that's the way we are governed. Otherwise, these people wouldn't have the track record they have. These people wouldn't have the happy little accident line that they have. They wouldn't be promoting these people instead of the best that they find. These happy little accidents where these are internationally traveling for 5 years with the wrong words, where they lose presentations, or where they flirt with you and invite you, to their house and stuff for a year and a half, and then suddenly block you everywhere and pretend you didn't exist while saying basically what you're saying. That's what these people do. And they're all terrible, because they're all part of the same show. That's why I show their faces and their names, because I really believe these people are traitors to our grandkids. And the only way that this is going to end is if the right and the left understand that the populist right movement in America, the Maha movement, is actually a ha-ha joke on all of our grandchildren, and it's being done by the same people as Tony Fauci and Francis Collins, because this guy worked with them, and Robert Malone worked with them, and Merrill Nass worked with them, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s dad and Brett Weinstein's dad worked together to produce the FDA. The vaccine schedule in America is a criminal enterprise, and that's why all these organizations exist, to accomplish nothing. That's why all those organizations exist, to never tell you about the long list of lies and murder that was used to misconstrue and all cause mortality rise into something else, a mystery virus. I'm repeating a lot here, ladies and gentlemen. Intramuscular injection is dumb. And Gigaohm Biological, like Brandy, brought that to you and was ignored by all these people. Here's the truth on a single slide. There is no safe vaccine. Intramuscular injection of medicine is a lie. They could have told you this, and you can find out very easily how bad these people are by just making a calendar for yourself. It's a lot of work, but it really yields a lot, and you'll be able to tell your grandchildren the truth in a way that you can't if you just listen to me. It's them. It's them. It's for all the marbles, ladies and gentlemen. Ingestion versus injection. Number one message that they ignore. PCR is a diagnostic fraud, also ignored. Synthetic recombinant genetics as just the only thing they've got, also ignored. It's really for all the marbles, guys. If you don't start to realize that, the only thing they can do is make pure quantities of DNA and transfect things and call it virology or call it immunology, then you're not understanding it yet. And the only thing they needed to do was put a synthetic pure quantity of what they wanted to find anywhere they wanted to find it, including in the hands of their USAID and EcoHealth Alliance paid operative in Wuhan. They would have done this because transfection is a crime, and the only way that they could substitute transfection for the current vaccine schedule is this elaborate hoax about a novel virus and being saved by transfection, when in reality they just substituted placebos and then only put a few hot batches out there so that they could test the rollout of the product. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the best lies that you can debunk yourself is endemicity. Realize that there's no evidence for endemicity. There's just the idea of it. Just like there's no real evidence for evolution, there's just the idea of it. And one has an incredibly compelling set of circumstantial evidence, and one has no circumstantial evidence for it. Ladies and gentlemen, non-specific PCR tests could be used to invert a background into evidence of spread, and RNA cannot pandemic. Those two things add up to this being a bunch of lies about RNA, about transfection, about population pyramids. Please, if you can, share my work. Find a way to do it. These people are guilty. I mean, really, really guilty. Don't let the past fade away. Don't let this lie become the truth. Thank you, guys. I got to go play some basketball. I'm kind of rushing to quit. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I got to go get my water bottle filled up, change my shoes. I'm very optimistic. I've got lots of steam right now because I realize that Mark is crushing it and we are crushing it, and their timeline work just keeps getting easier and easier to show it. I know it's long shows, but talking about 5 years of history with each person is quite a lot of work. But if you do it, the pattern is so incredible that you can see that Steve Kirsch and Jessica Rose and Peter McCullough and Kevin McCairn and George Webb and Paul Cottrell and Robert Malone and Jill Glasspool Malone are connected all the way through. And so the right populist movement in America was captured by an elaborate operation. And if you on the left figure this out, then you can have a little sympathy and maybe you can help me rescue your family and friends from the theater. Thank you very much. I'll see you again as soon as I have a show worth hitting the button for. I think it might be in a day or two already. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. See you soon.